Hello, everyone. So, interesting talk today. We're going to learn how to use the AMTI force plates that are located in the biomechanics lab, as well as use the NorAxon MyoForce software to interpret the data that we get from the force plates. So, the main thing that we're going to be interested in today is calculating counter movement or vertical jump height, depending on whatever you're interested in. And this will allow you to receive data that you can use for either a study or a class purpose. Before we get started, like I mentioned previously, we're going to be using two different uh, pieces of software. We're going to be using the AMTI force plates, and we're going to be interpreting the results on the MyoForce platform. The lecture will be together, but there's going to be two main parts while I go through and talk about how to use these pieces of software. But the AMTI is on a computer that doesn't have internet access, so I wasn't able to get on and record from the actual software. So I had to take some screenshots. So you just have to bear with me for the initial portion of the lecture. I still feel that it will facilitate a good idea on how to use the AMTI force plates, though. And again, the force plates can do a number of different things, but this lecture is going to be focused on just interpreting counter movement jump or vertical jump height. Okay, so this is what some of the technology, or this is what all the technology that you guys are going to use looks like when you go into the lab, just to give you an idea on what to look for when you get in there. Again, we have the MyoForce software. These are the force plates. As you see, there's two of them, force plate 1 and 2. For this study, as you can see, the participant here, we're only concerned with one force plate since we're just looking at jump height and reactive strength index. This will be the station that you guys will be at. As you can see, you have both force plates and the amps that are connected to them. And when you come in, before you start doing any type of data collection, you're going to want to power both amplifiers on via the power button here. So right there and right there. You're going to want to let them warm up for about 30 minutes. And then you're going to want to zero out both plates. And that's very important to do before you start any type of data collection. So again, just to give you an idea on what the amplifiers, what the desk is going to look like whenever you're on here interpreting the data. The next slide is going to give you an idea on what the main screen for the AMTI NetForce software is going to look like. And this is interesting and important for you guys to be able to know and understand some of the key things that you'll be looking for. So as you can see here, we have the force and moment axes. These are going to be important for interpretation. FX1, FY2, and FZ3 are typically the most utilized. And the FX1 is good for the mediolateral. It's a mediolateral axis. FY2 is anterior posterior, so front to back. And then for this study, the most important one is FZ3, and that's our vertical moment axis. So you can see we have both force plates here. So we got force plate 1 and force plate 2. And even though we're only using one for this study, it's still important to turn them both on and have them both teared and warmed up properly. If you, speaking of tearing the plates, if these lines are not isoelectric, if they're kind of fuzzy, then you will need to tear the plates. And this just happens over time due to drift from electrical impulses in the lab. So if these are fuzzy, then you need to go ahead and tear the scale in order to assure that you get valid and reliable results. The next thing you will want to do, if you don't have the subject already entered in, is you're going to want to weigh the subject. So you'll just have them stand on one or both platforms, and you'll weigh them, and they'll give you their weight in newtons. So don't get scared if you see that the weight is a little bit higher than what it should be, because it is being measured in newtons. And there is a subject selection button here, and that's something that I'll get to in about 2 slides. But as I mentioned, so this is what the main screen is going to look like for the AMTI software. And I apologize in advance just due to the fact that I couldn't actually record on this computer. But you see the moment axes and things like that. one more thing before we go through. You simply will just click the moment axes that you want to look at. Like I said, these three are the most popular. And with this computer, it might be better to just to minimize the amounts of axes that you use, just due to the fact of the computer being a little slower. But you simply click the axes that you want to look at, or the channels, and then you can drag these triangle markers and place them where you want them to be. So they don't have to be always in this position. You can kind of move them and manipulate them to where you can actually see what's going on, which will be important during the counter movement or vertical jump series. Okay, so next up, this is just some of the top buttons that you can click on the AMTI NetForce software. You have file setup, utilities, protocol, etc. You can pause this video to kind of go through and see exactly what does what. One of the main things to keep in mind here is the file option, and that's what you're going to use for both saving and opening documents, and that's something that we're going to get to in a later slide as well, because you want to make sure that you're getting your data recorded and being able to transfer it to the other computer for the NorAxon MyoForce interpretation. So like I mentioned previously, we're getting back into the subject management. And again, this is going to be useful if you already have somebody. That way you don't have to reweigh them or anything like that. You can just start off right where you left off. Of course, it is important to remember that weight does fluctuate, so you may want to reweigh them, but you won't have to put in things like birth date, exam conditions, trials, ID numbers, things like that. So basically, you'll just click this subject button, and it will pop open this box here, and you can just go and simply click on the person that you want to use, and it will have their weight saved. But like I said, you want to be kind of cautious when doing that. But nonetheless, you can go back on and click the individual and get started right back up where you left off from a previous data collection. So as I mentioned, we have our subject selected and weighed in newtons. And once we do that, it's time for the counter movement jump. As you can see here, we're only on one force plate, but that's sufficient for this type of test. There are absolutely times where you want to use both force plates, but for this interpretation, only one is really needed just for our purposes. And like I mentioned previously, the channel that we're interested in is FZ3 because that's our vertical axis. So that's going to be the main one. Still, for this study, I had all three of them turned on, but FZ3 was our main one that we interpreted. Now, during the administration and execution of the counter movement jump, it's important to be attentive at the computer, because you want to make sure that the data that you're recording actually makes it up on and stays on this screen. So when you hit start, these lines are going to start moving. So you want to have it timed out to where if you give them a 3, 2, 1 countdown, you hit this start button, and then at 3, and then you go 2, 1 jump, and then when they're landed back, and make sure that there is some time after they land back on the force plate, but you want to hit stop before all this data moves off screen, because once it does that, then you've lost it. So it is tricky to do that, but that's the way that this NorAxon software is able to interpret this. Other pieces of software can use a trigger indicator, which for this computer is set up with a space bar, and I believe has a 4-second timing period that can be adjusted, but the NorAxon software does better whenever you just hit the start and stop in unison with when they jump. But just make sure that you start, have at least a second before they jump, and then when they land back, have a little bit of a delay before you hit the stop button. And just to let it be known that when you hit start, this start button also turns into the stop buttons too. So you just only have to worry about hitting one button, but just make sure that you have a second or two before and a second or two after the landing. And that's going to ensure that you get the data that you need. And it will look like this if you do have the the data on the screen when you stop it. Okay, but if this runs off, then you would have a problem just because you wouldn't have any data to interpret. When we actually get to the NorAxon MyoForce software, this is what FZ will look like. And as you can see, it's really interesting because you have the loading phase, the flight phase, and then the landing. And it breaks it down for you, as well as gives you things like reactive strength index, jump height, etc. So it's going to do all of that for you. But it is important, again, that when you're here, just making sure that it stays on the screen and that you can actually still have this on there, and then you can go through, and I'll show you now how to save the data from the software. So when you save it, you'll basically go up and hit the file button here, and then you'll click save. There'll be an indicator on there to have you save it, and you'll save it to this folder here. So you'll go computer, it's going to save it as a DSA data file, okay? But you'll go to computer, data part 1, then there'll be another folder that says AMTI NetForce, and then you'll hit the data in that actual AMTI NetForce folder. And it will save it as a DSA data file, and whenever you actually get to that folder, they will all be in order from when you last recorded them. So the data collection that you had, if you just did it, should be that last file. And from there, this is very important. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to transfer that file as the text file that it's going to be saved as onto a flash drive, because the MyoForce software is not located on the AMTI NetForce computer. So you want to save that to a flash drive that you can plug into another computer that has the NorAxon software on it. And that's where this next piece of the lecture is going to continue on off of. All right, so from here, we can actually go into the NorAxon MyoForce software. And as you can see, I actually have a computer that has internet access that allows me to just screen record for you guys instead of taking the screenshots. So this should be a little bit easier to follow, but I still think that the NetForce software was pretty straightforward as well on the previous PowerPoint slides. So before we get started here, there's a number of things we want to make sure that we've already done, in that we've already gotten the data transferred to a flash drive that we got from the AMTI NetForce software, and we've transferred it to the flash drive and brought it to a computer that has this NorAxon software. You guys should be familiar with what the icon looks like, as I've already mentioned that. Basically, you just click on that and it'll pop up this as the home screen. Now, since we've already measured our data and everything, we don't need to worry about this measure button, but we do need to make sure before we get started that we are on the MyoForce button here, so that we're going to be looking at force plates rather than EMGs. So just make sure we have MyoForce clicked here. We'll go ahead and go to database. We go ahead and so let's just act like this isn't there. I've already ran this data report just to make sure that we got the output that we were looking for, but just pretend like I said that this is not here. So essentially what you'll do is you'll go to import. We're going to import from a text file, right, because that's what we were using. We'll go and we'll click our USB just like you see there, and we'll click the desired DSA data file, text file that we were looking to do. So in this case, it's this one right here. So we'll just double click. Okay, now on this screen, it's very important to follow a number of things. First things first, we want to make sure that we're measuring in the hertz frequency that we were, which was 200. So we'll go ahead and click that in there, so that way it will allow the MyoForce software to interpret our data. Now we're going to try to get the channels. Remember, there's 12 channels. So the goal is to try to get those 12 channels to pop up here. So what we'll do is we'll go, we see our data here, okay? So we're going to go here and we're going to click separate with a comma, okay? And that's going to bring up our different channels. And if that didn't work, you can also play around with this here, right? But the main goal is just to get it to where it can interpret that there are 12 channels, right? And that's what we're looking for, and that's how we can assure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. Next thing, we're going to have to distinguish that we're not looking at EMG, right? We're looking at force. So we need to have these units transferred to newtons. So we'll click and drag all the way down, double click here, and we'll change it to force, okay? And as you can see, our units have changed as well. So moving through towards the end of the process to get our report, we'll click OK. I'm just going to overwrite this one. Okay, so like I said, just pretend like that's not there. So we'll go here, we'll double click. Okay, so you can see our channels. We're going to have to rename channel 3 to FZ, which will allow the NorAxon MyoForce software to know which axis is vertical. But as you can see here, we have channels 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so to rename this channel, which is something we have to do for the data interpretation, we'll double click, we'll right click here. Okay, and I'll go and I'll hit channel properties, come right here simply and just rename capital F lowercase z. Okay, and it'll change that to FZ, so that'll allow it to know what our vertical axis was. If we were to have used 2 force plates, then we would also have to change channel 6, but since we only stood on 1, we only have to interpret the data on the 1 force plate for this case. We'll go ahead and hit analysis report. Okay, and from here it's important to be clicked on the MyoForce, okay, and then the jump analysis button, okay, and that's going to spit out this output for us, and you can see even a little description down here on what everything is. Okay, so I'm going to hit again MyoForce and then jump analysis, hit OK, and as you can see, we have what we need. We'll go ahead and hit next and select our specific channels, which is FZ. It's automatically going to distinguish that, and you can see down here that it's even separated out into a load, flight, and landing phase. Okay, so again from here I'll hit next, and it will spit out our data report. Okay, and it's going to have our load, flight, and landing. It's going to have newtons for each the peak newtons for the end of the loading phase as well as the beginning of the landing phase. It's going to have jump height by flight time in centimeters. It's going to have net impulse jump height, reactive strength index, and the mean and maximum for those as well. So this is the data report that you'll get once you're done doing this. And from here, as you can see, you have a number of different options. You can print, export report, or anything that you need to do to go ahead and get this, for example, back onto a flash drive for later use or interpretation. With that concludes the end of the how-to from the AMTI NetForce software for both counter movement jump and vertical jump height, and moving it into the NorAxon MyoForce platform for further interpretation and the report sheet that you can see here.